Good morning. It is, what day is it? Friday.
Hey, it's Friday.
March
It's always
14th.
Friday.
It's always Friday on the Skinny.
That's right.
Here. Ray Rowell here at the helm because Mitch Perry is stuck in Tallahassee in exile for the 60-day legislative session. He's been filing stories for the Florida Phoenix. So this morning it's myself. Ben Montgomery is here. Good morning,
Hey,
Ben.
Ray.
How are you?
I'm very good. How are you?
Ben Montgomery, New York Times bestselling author, independent journalist, contributor to CL, and burgeoning, blossoming boat captain.
Just got my 1099 today.
He got his 1099 from us. Don't tell the IRS because I think we're late. But we got an exciting show today. In the second half of the show, we'll be joined by Congressman Jim Davis. He's part of a group that helped revive a 2022-23-ish play about the Tampa Woolworth sit-ins. But right now, we're joined in studio by another popular Tampa politician, District 4's Tampa City Councilman Bill Carlson. Bill, welcome back to the Skinny. How are you today?
Good morning. Thanks for inviting me back.
Thank you for coming back for us. It's good to see you, especially after a long day at council. Yesterday, you had CRA, and then you had the night session. We always appreciate any Tampa City Council person for coming by in the morning, so thank you.
How many hours of meeting is that yesterday? Do you know?
Yesterday, the whole meeting the meeting starts at 9 a.m. in the morning, and then we ended by noon, but then we came back from 5 until 10.
Yeah.
So if we're done before 2 a.m., that means it's a short day.
Yeah. Goodness.
And by the way, one of our favorite things is welcoming Tampa City Council people, county commissioners, because our listeners get a chance to call in. So if you do want to call in, 813-239-9663. You can send a text to 813-433-0885. Send an email to dj@wmnf.org. We will get that in the queue, get Councilman Carlson to speak to that stuff. But, Bill, let's go straight to your district here, the corner of Bayshore and Barcelona. Or Barcelona. I can't say it exactly the way you're supposed to say it. In January, for the third time in the project's history, a proposal by the developer-related group to rezone a portion of the Rodef Shalom Synagogue's land to build a high-rise condo tower was rejected, again, by council after more and more hours of back and forth between the neighborhood and lawyers for the group. This lays out the groundwork for a potential lawsuit. Two councilmen, Louis Vieira, who was here a couple weeks ago, and citywide rep Alan Clendenin, actually voted to approve the revised plan for the developer, and they kind of wondered out loud about whether or not it was worth fighting over this, considering the lawsuit and the fact that council may have to vote on an even bigger project down the road. Can you talk about your vote to reject that proposal, but more than that, what the future holds for Tampaños who kind of feel like they don't have much say when it comes to developers and development?
Yeah, that one actually is in litigation, so I can't talk about it specifically. When we're meeting to review land use cases, we meet as a quasi-judicial body, and we can't talk about them once they've been filed, and then we can't talk about them for 30 to 60 days afterwards. And if they're in litigation, we can't talk until the litigation is over. But in general, what we've seen, Tampa over the last few decades has gone through a cycle where the administration has been pro-neighborhood and then pro-development. And right now we have a city council that is pro-neighborhood, and most of us were put in place by the neighborhoods and the grassroots activism. And so we pay attention to neighborhood issues. At the same time, the neighborhoods have gotten much more sophisticated about how they respond to land use requests. The law was changed a few years ago so that if 100 people show up with blue shirts and say they don't like red houses, we can't consider that. We can't vote based on a popularity contest. We can only vote based on competent, substantial evidence that's presented in the room. And it needs to be a fair hearing, which is why we can't talk about it before or after. So what's happened, though, is that the neighborhoods have hired their own attorneys, their own experts, and they've gotten very sophisticated about coming before council to present. What that means, though, is the neighborhoods that don't have the money to do that are at a disadvantage. And so THAN, which is the citywide organization, has been trying to help those neighborhoods by bringing resources to them as well. And the whole idea is to create a community that is representative of what the people want and that makes our quality of life better. You know, under the under administrations that are pro-development, sometimes the goal is building new buildings. Instead, what we've been focused on is how do we make a better quality of life for the people.
You mentioned the quasi-judicial aspect of what you do, acting like a court, and I don't know if you can comment on this, but maybe in a more general sense. I think late last year, we reported at Creative Loafing, and other outlets did too. The 13th Judicial Court said that the city of Tampa lacked the quasi-judicial authority to make a decision on the development of this particular site. And this is something that's probably going to end up in the Florida Supreme Court. I know you can't comment on this particular case, but in the meantime, when you do talk to people with neighborhoods, resourced and not, I mean, is everybody just kind of in a waiting game to see until this gets up there and then there's a ruling?
Yeah, because that is litigation. Also, we can't talk about the details of it. The city attorney has said that it's business as usual until it's not.
Okay.
And so we'll see what happens. If the Supreme Court says that cities don't have quasi-judicial authority, then we'll have to figure out, do cities have any authority? Quasi-judicial is a certain kind of setting, certain kinds of proceeding. But if we could do it legislatively, for example, what does that mean? But we don't know the answers yet. We'll see what the Supreme Court says.
Would you be relieved to not swear in a bunch of people every night?
I think there should be a better process that makes it simpler and easier to understand for developers and neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. If an entitlement is written a certain way, the staff should be able to say yes or no on certain kinds of things. And then the bigger ones, there should be a modified process. So as a result, we're looking at updating the code right now, but we also need to figure out how to update the process. In fact, I just met with the city attorney yesterday to talk about that, because why should it be that a developer goes through a year or two of proceedings and then ends up with a bunch of people at a meeting presenting competent substantial evidence, and then they get rejected and then they sue? It's a long process. Instead, if we make it simpler to understand and people know where the boundaries are, hopefully they won't try to cross them as much.
Yeah, you mentioned there is an extensive review of the municipal code and the zoning and things like that. How close are we to that particular workshop to when the community can really kind of see what the findings are?
That one's still quite a ways away. There's a draft that's been posted.
Okay.
I forgot the name of the website, Forward Tampa or something like that. You can look at that. But at the same time, the Planning Commission is going through an update of the comprehensive plan for the community. And so people can go to their website also. Both of those work together on land use. So if you care about your neighborhood, you care about where your street is, go to those maps, please look at them and see what changes are proposed, because right now you can still give input to it.
Okay, we'll find that and link that on our blog here on WMNF.org. If you're just joining us, by the way, our guest on the Skinny is Tampa City Councilman for District 4, Bill Carlson. We're discussing all things Tampa, really. You can join the conversation by calling us at the studio, 813-239-9663. Joe is back there. He'll get you on the air with us. You can also text us, 813-433-0885, or email dj@WMNF.org. I have like 78 tabs open on my computer, Bill, and one of them is a Google Doc called Grievances, and its origin stems from watching you in January at a Tampa City Council meeting where you called for a discussion of the city of Tampa's grievance processes. You mentioned the number of high-profile departures from the city. We're thinking of people like Stephen Benson, who was a senior planner, Andy Mikulski, Nicole Travis, administrator of the Development Economic Opportunity, Erica Moody from the CRAs, Keon Henderson from Housing. It's a long list, and Whit Reamer joins that list at the end of this month. He's the Chief Sustainability and Resilience Officer, and he might be leaving for different reasons. But in that session, we heard from a couple of former employees at the city of Tampa who quite bravely detailed their peril in working in the mobility department and the nature of their departure. Those employees mentioned how HR was not a safe place to go at the city of Tampa, and some who came up to the dais that day wondered why there wasn't a more formal exit interview process at the city. Ultimately, at this discussion...
And did so, I'll point out, with earnestness. I watched these clips. These were employees who seemed to me to be greatly affected by having no place to turn.
These were people who really loved their job. I think by most objective measures were very gifted at their jobs. And it was difficult to watch them in front of you guys because you could sense that there was a very high level of vulnerability and pain and hurt. And you guys unanimously voted to get an independent lawyer to review this grievance process and reach out to former employees to offer better options for those with workforce complaints. During the meeting, you said you probably get 100 calls from people who are more or less whistleblowers who are afraid of retaliation. Where is the city on all of this? Do you know? Do you have an update on that?
Well, the administration's simple response is they try to blame city council. They say it's city council's fault that all these folks have left. And my response is...
what? Like, how?
They don't give details of it. Oh, well, they don't like working with city council. They don't like the way city council treats them. If we ask them a tough question in a city council meeting, they think that that's the reason why people leave. What they don't realize is that the people that we have interfaced with, we talk to them regularly. Some of the ones you talked about, I talk to them almost every day. I know exactly why they left for many of the reasons you mentioned. But the majority of people that left, city council doesn't have any communication with at all. And so you can't keep hiding under the guise that it's city council's fault. The reality is there are things that need to change. I met with the chief of staff the other day to talk about this, and I said there are systemic changes we need to make. We need to change the whistleblower process, but we also need to create a more positive culture within the city. There's a difference in running a collaborative, creative, innovative group of people versus running a military organization or a police department. Ideally, the police department would be a very positive place to work either. But when you're a police chief, you're used to giving orders and people listen to them. When you work in an environment that's not designed like that, people are used to giving feedback, and they don't want to be hit back, attacked, cursed at if they give feedback.
Is that the issue here? This is what's going on?
Sure. I've had employees who have complained about retaliation from their supervisors. They've had retaliation from the mayor or the mayor's people. The mayor has some folks on her team who participate in dirty politics, and I've called that out many times, where they pitch negative stories about city council, the media. They're probably on the phone right now pitching more stories. There are allegations of the mayor's staff walking around raising money during office time against me in the last campaign, which is illegal. You can't do that. And people who are ethical and smart, they don't want to be caught up in politics like that. They just want a peaceful environment. And to give you my philosophy, after the race, the mayor and the former mayor raised about at least half the money to run a almost $1 million campaign against my $150,000, and I still won 60%. Thank you to the public for supporting me. But after that race, I went to the mayor and I said, look, I'm going to forget the past. I'm going to forget what happened. I want to look forward, because my interest is making sure the people of this community have the right representation and we have the right solutions. Within a couple of days after that, they start hitting me with politics again.
Yeah, and we should say that a spokesperson for the mayor has said that while there is no formal exit interview process, they said that employees can request one. The chief of staff, John Bennett, seemed open to, fixing that for you guys when he was with you in that discussion. This brings me back to a story that popped up in my Facebook memories. It was called Tampa Leaders and Former Mayor Decry Unprecedented Friction Between Castor and City Council. This is April 2022. Creative Loafing's then Justin Garcia, one of your former students, Ben. He's at the Times now. He did. He was great for us there. He talked with his sources. Probably had 200 collective years in politics, right? And this was after a mayoral press conference. This is during the Orlando Gooch, Don Dingfelder era. The press conference was about transparency and accountability. And I remember you coming out to the plaza after that and holding your own presser saying that you've been calling for these things for years. But lately on the dais, I've heard you kind of complimenting city staff, and you did it a little bit here just now, and even sometimes thanking the mayor for working with you on certain issues. I want to ask you, how is your relationship with the executive branch of Tampa City government these days compared to what was a very tumultuous time then?
Yeah, and what happened then was that the mayor doxed a woman who complained to staff, and I thought that was inappropriate, and that's why I stood up after the press conference, because we love the person, and we feel like whistleblowers of any kind should have a fair chance to be heard. By the way, I mentioned this before we got on the air, but I recently got a public records request for all communication I had to and from the two ladies who spoke at public comment fortunately, there's no communication between us. But the interesting thing is who wants that? Why is anybody interested in it? And what do they hope to achieve by that? These are two women who got up and emotionally told the story of what happened to them, and now somebody is trying to turn that into some kind of political weapon, and it's sad that goes on. I told you I met with the chief of staff the other day. I met with the city attorney yesterday. I'm hopeful that we can come to some kind of conclusion, but for the sake of the public, there should not be this petty political situation. People who are political are constantly running scenarios about who's going to be next, who's going to do what. There was a conspiracy theory by the mayor's staff that I was going to run against her. I told her over and over again I wasn't going to run against her. But after I didn't run against her, I said, look, I told you the truth. I didn't run against you. So let's stop. Let's move forward. But unfortunately, there's not a collaborative situation there. And one time, because of all the dirty politics I saw, I sent an email to the city attorney and the HR director asking, what are the rights of a city council member? Because I'm an employee, but I'm also an elected official. I sent an email. Think about it, I'm technically an employee of the city. I sent an email to the chief of staff, to the city attorney and the HR director. And guess who responded to me?
The mayor?
The chief of staff. I gave away the answer, but the chief of staff responded to me, and I said, that's inappropriate. Why did you guys give it? And they said, well, HR reports to the chief of staff. Well, if HR is forwarding everything to the chief of staff, how is there any confidentiality? How can a whistleblower come through if there's no confidentiality of anything? And how the ultimate thing is, and for anybody who's listening at the administration, I would appeal to you, let's set the politics aside and create a collaborative environment in the city. Our people more than ever need to be supported. We've had 20, 30 very high-level people, top of their game, leave the city. And you might expect that in the last 2 years of an administration anyway. But most of them have left quietly saying, we don't want to work in a place with all the dirty politics. Well, if you know that people are leaving because of dirty politics, stop the dirty politics. Why do you want that to be your legacy? Let's create a legacy of listening to the community, helping the community.
I have a crazy question. I ask it in all earnestness. Do you guys do team building exercises ever? Have you ever done a retreat? City council sort of gets alone and
without violating sunshine.
Something public. You'd advertise it 3 days. But trust falls. Something.
We've had strategy sessions, but no like ropes course or anything like that. I think personally,
you've never caught Charlie Miranda as he falls down into your arms.
I think we need to do this, Ray.
But I think we disagree on the dais. But what people don't see is that as soon as the camera turns off, we're all talking about, we can't talk about substantive things. We're talking about who's going on what trip. Charlie's telling me stories about when he was a kid. Last night he showed me this picture where he was showing me he was young and single, and I was like, wow, I'd never seen a picture of you like that before. And we all get along with each other very well. The mayor, the people who've known her forever say, we love her. She's a delightful person. And my experience with her one-on-one typically is like that until we start talking about policy. Mm-hmm. And then it's about power and control and politics. And what we need to do is see more of the side of people internally where people get along rather than all the fighting and bickering.
And as an aside, I would be negligent if I didn't say this. Speaking of the mayor's office, there's only one person in the race so far. He's a 24-year-old named Alan Henderson. Your colleague, District 7 Tampa City Councilman Louis Vieira, was on air with us a few weeks ago. He told us that now is not his time to run for mayor. But in January, you told me that you would announce your plans this year. Is today the day when you let the public know what you're going to do?
No, I think last week we're 2 years out from the primary, and then the runoff would be in late April. So we're still 2 years out, and I think that's too early for anybody to make any kind of announcement. Of course, I'm looking at it, and I've got a lot of people coming to me, asking me. There are people who are interested in good government, consultative government that listens to the public and creates a true vision of Tampa that's built around people instead of buildings. And so we'll see.
By the way, if you're just joining us, our guest on the Skinny right now is Tampa City Councilman for District 4, Bill Carlson. We're discussing all things Tampa, and you can join the conversation by calling us at the studio, 813-239-9663, texting 813-433-0885, or sending an email like Bubba did to dj@wmnf.org. Bubba just wanted to say he loves the pedestrian bridge opening up on the Howard Franklin. He wants more and better cross-bay connections.
Is that open?
Via bus and ferry. I think it's opening soon. But I'll ask a transit question related here. Yesterday at Council, Tampa City Council voted 6-1 to approve a plan to move $700,000 from the CRAs to fund a gap in funding being experienced by the TECO streetcar. That move keeps the streetcar, which is objectively is very popular, 1.3 million rides last year, I think, free through the rest of the year. So essentially that's a vote for transit, at least in my eyes. And it comes months after the council voted 4-3 to allocate $1.65 million to make HART Route 1 free to ride for an entire year. The money for that HART funding came from fees that would have paid for electric vehicle charging stations. And now, according to HART, almost 5,000 people ride Route 1 every day. That's a 40% increase in 2 months, according to HART. Yesterday, the lone no vote on the streetcar gap was Charlie Miranda. He expressed some concern about unknown potential federal shortfalls. I have a couple questions based around this. How much does the federal government's influence on local decision-making concern you right now, Councilman?
Well, this administration has had a close relationship with the Biden administration, and so they've been able to bring in several $100 million in grants, and much of it has been around different kinds of transit. But it looks like all or part of that is going to go away. There was just an announcement a couple of days ago that $1.5 million for trees in East Tampa was canceled.
I saw this.
And so we'll see what else is changing. What we've got to do is be smart enough to adapt and find things that we can get funding for. In terms of the streetcar has a lot of potential. There are various plans to expand the rail and the rail of the streetcar, the footprint of the streetcar,
sure,
and or put rubber tire buses. There's a plan to maybe upgrade the trains so that they'll be faster and more modern. Some people like that idea, some people don't.
It's kind of scary as a pedestrian.
Faster trains.
Yeah.
And then there are other transit solutions out there. My colleague Lynn Hertak came with the idea of funding Route 1 on HART. I voted for the streetcar because streetcar was created after HART was created, but HART was a creation of the Martinez administration, which moved the funding out of the city into what's now HART. And my argument is that the board of HART needs to try to figure out how to increase its own funding because the city of Tampa doesn't have extra money. We're trying to spend on things like affordable housing and parks and sidewalks and bike lanes and fixing potholes. And we don't have a lot of extra money. So if HART ultimately refuses to increase their budget, then we could try to figure out how to get access to our budget back, and then we could create a more comprehensive view of transit in Tampa.
Yeah, the inception of HART is something, and PSTA or PTSA, I always get that confused, is something for another show. But, you mentioned the funding piece, thinking about what the city's role is or isn't in boosting transit locally via HART. In April, I think the HART board is supposed to discuss increasing its millage in a charter discussion that could end up on the ballot. Would you support HART increasing its ad valorem?
I think they have to have the discussion and talk about what they would spend the money on and how they would do it. I might get the numbers slightly off, but they're charging like $500,000 now. I think they can go up to $3 million. So if the $500,000 right now is generating somewhere like $100 million a year, they could go up to $600 million a year without the sales tax solution. So for more than 10 years, we've been told, 15 years, we've been told the only way to get transit is to have a sales tax change. Another change would be to get the rate, the ad valorem rate changed. Now, if the legislature and the governor get rid of property taxes, then we'll see what happens. It could be a totally different environment.
Man, we could do a whole nother show on that. Every time somebody talks about getting rid of property taxes, my mind automatically goes to renters. And I think we could talk about renting and housing all day long, but we should do that on another
The
show,
other thing for people to know too is out of the I won't remember the numbers exactly off the top of my head, but out of the $1.9 billion budget, something like 30% of it comes from property taxes at the city. And so it will have a devastating impact, but property taxes by themselves don't even pay for all of police and fire.
Any appetite from you to serve on a heart board? Would you do it?
I'm not against it. I want us to have a better solution. Hart has gone through like 10 CEOs in 10 years or something like that, and there must be some kind of systemic problem there. And I would like to see that issue fixed. Maybe it's fixed now.
Yeah, there's a little bit more stability compared to the...
I would like to see that fixed so the public has confidence in what they're doing. And then experiments like running Route 1 for free is a good idea. Eventually, if these routes work, you could replace them. We thought by now we would have autonomous vehicles, but you could replace them with autonomous vehicles. You could replace them with a rail line.
BRT.
There's all kinds of things that we could do. And so we should be experimenting with those solutions because we can't expand the roads to the capacity that we will need in the future.
Yeah, I was chatting with a total stranger yesterday in Orlando. He said, "Where are you from?" I said, "Tampa." He said, "I love the streetcar." This is the first thing out of his mouth. I love the
It's so funny because somebody yesterday in the CRA
hilarious.
conversation in Tampa said, it was Clendenin, I think, he said, listen, the streetcar works. You know what place doesn't have transit? Orlando. You don't want this place to become Orlando.
Right.
So that's funny. That's a nice kismet thing there.
I got a left fielder here, Ray. If we
Let's do it. We have time.
Yeah.
Congressman Jim Davis is on his way in, and when he comes in, we'll transition, but we'll hold the councilman hostage for now.
Yeah,
Thank you.
So this just comes out of the blue, and it's an idea I had. I just wonder if you'll be the first city council person in Tampa to endorse it. 1 day a year, open the parks up, city parks, all of them, to camping. Come out and stay overnight. Pitch your tent, and we call it Campa.
There's some
Outdoor initiative. I know there's some
What's the
legislation
problem
against
with this?
camping in public right now,
Yeah,
but can we get
you
around it?
encourage 1 day a year. You encourage everybody to come out. You get the local shop, the outfitters, REI, and so forth to sponsor it. Invite everybody out to sleep under the stars 1 day a year. What's the harm?
it's a cool idea.
Meet your neighbors. Yeah,
It's a cool idea. Are other cities using that, or
I don't know. Certainly not with that name. We could brand it.
I like
Campa.
this.
This is
I
straight
like
out
the
of my
idea.
head, folks.
I like the idea of sleeping under the stars instead of just camping, because it sounds like something fun you could all do together.
Yeah.
And if there was a comet going by or some big
Kind of astronomy angle.
Schedule
See,
it for the next,
people always talk about how
shower.
Bill is, has the marketing career outside of city council, and I forget who it was yesterday who mentioned that. Bill, I love when politicians come in here, electeds, because I get to see their physical reactions to certain phrases, and I kind of want to see what your body does when I say the phrase "Great 8." Right? Great 8, we're talking about a dozen key city projects, and it references the 8 number is a reference to the stakeholders in the coordination of these processes. Those are the project owners, city attorneys, city council. In a recent discussion about the Great 8, they talked about South Howard flood relief. There's a purportedly $64.5 million project, which gets the neighborhood a system to move stormwater from Swan Avenue down Howard and out to Old Tampa Bay. It's supposed to be a major stormwater thing. West Swan's in there, South Howard out to the bay, as I said. But council has called for an alternative routes for the drainage. You've said the project should be canceled altogether, arguing that it's your job to make sure that constituents in that neighborhood don't get flooded, and that the solutions that we have on the table right now are not going to help them from being flooded in the next hurricane. These discussions have not been easy or unanimous in any way. How has this project and really the auspice of flooding from the storms affected your constituency and your relationship with the people in your district? Because you are a guy who's always out and available for your constituents. So how has that been? The flooding has not been easy for anyone.
Well, we've had something like 20 more different areas in South Tampa that flooded, 3 or 4 just in my neighborhood. And I've been out personally to meet with them, meet with the neighbors, look at the pictures and videos, and we've in most of them we've taken the stormwater people and sometimes wastewater people, and we've had great discussions. One thing we found is that there's a terrible lack of maintenance, and I could go into details, but the stormwater tax was increased back in 2016 under the prior administration, and we were told at the time that maintenance was done, but what we see evidence of is that maintenance was not done on a large scale. There are culverts that are completely covered over there that are full of water because they've cracked. There are ditches that have been filled in. And even if you have a historic level storm, you need to do the basic maintenance first. And then you need to look at short-term solutions. How do we prevent flooding the next time because we have storms coming up this summer? Out of all those neighborhoods and communities, the mayor has been to one, which is a small area of Parkland Estates. And that area floods. There are bowls in South Tampa. The area floods. But there were some new conditions that caused it to flood this time. And many of us think that as part of the reason is there was a lack of maintenance north of there in an area called Palmacia Pines. So this project was pushed forward because it was already on the table. And many people in the neighborhood have done public record searches and looked through thousands of pages. And what they see is that the analysis that was done was not thorough. It did not look at all the different possibilities. They didn't even inspect the culverts that they think they have that cause it to go down Howard. And so based not on science, but based on speed and price, apparently they've decided to go down Howard and through Parkland Estates. Majority of people in Parkland Estates are against it. The other neighborhoods along Howard Avenue against it, the businesses on Howard Avenue against. But there's a small group of people in Parkland Estates whose houses flooded, and they're naturally very upset. But they have been whipped up either by the administration or people within that neighborhood to fight for this project at all costs. And I don't understand. It's the most irrational thing I've ever seen. The administration also told people that Palmacia Pines is included, even though it only appeared in any documents in the fall after the storms. It was not in the documents before. It's part of the floodplain, so they get caught up in semantics. But I asked a stormwater representative from the dais at the podium, I said, in front of these neighbors, I said, when is the first time that they're going to be protected from this solution? And he said, in 4 years. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, these people, they're sitting behind you. They're renovating their houses right now. They're going to be flooded this summer, right? Yes. And even for the next 4 years, we can't stop them from being flooded. No. I said, after 4 years, the public records say it's only going to help in a 3.5-inch storm, right? Yes. How much was Milton in that area? 11.5 inches, or some measures 13.5. So if it's not going to protect anybody in the next 4 years, and it's not going to protect after 4 years, why is anybody in favor of this? Instead, we need to put short-term solutions in and find a viable solution. It's not, they keep pitting like the neighbors against the businesses, or part of Parkland Estates against the rest of Parkland Estates. It's none of that. It's about finding something that's actually going to stop your house from getting flooded. Why would you not be in favor of that? And so, they send all these emails like, oh, Carlson must have a conflict of interest. He cares about businesses instead of, it's a lot of politics, and it's typical or indicative of what we see at this administration. All the other neighborhoods get along fine. In fact, the other neighborhoods are working well together. But this project is not going to protect the people in Parkland Estates, and it's not going to protect the people in Palmacia Pines, and it will have a devastating impact on several neighborhoods and businesses.
The congressman just walked in, and I want to leave you with the silly question, Councilman. Why would you want to, let's say you are going to run for mayor, do you really want to be the Tampa mayor that has to talk about the Tampa Bay Rays and building a stadium in this community?
I was going to bring up baseball. Thank you.
Well, the good thing is I've always told the Rays I'm not a baseball fan. And so I'm a business person and an economics major. And so who best to talk about it if there's a viable proposal in Tampa? Because I'll look at it objectively. I don't have any emotional connection to it, but I'll look at it and say, does it make sense for the people of Tampa? Is there in the region, is there a economic benefit to it? And if there is, then it would be okay to look at it. There's no money in the city of Tampa, so I don't know where it would come from.
Well, it's definitely not coming from property taxes. Thanks for.
We should have him on for a show where we just talk about the Rays marketing strategy.
Oh, we could do that. We could do that. Bill, thank you for coming on. And obviously, I think you're going to hang out as we talk about this next segment and this production. We want to stay in Tampa, but we want to turn the clock back about 64 years. That's when a young man, Clarence Fort, head of the NAACP Youth Council, bravely organized a bunch of high schoolers to stage Tampa's Woolworth sit-ins, where lunch counters were segregated at the time. Tampa, obviously, was not the only city in the South where young people were putting their bodies on the line. But it was a city where the mayor, Julian B. Lane at the time, told his officers not to arrest the protesters, but to more or less stand by and prevent any violence. Some people, many, say that this quote-unquote Tampa technique made our local Woolworth sit-in some of the most effective in the South. When the Righteous Triumph is a play written, in full disclosure, by former Creative Loafing Tampa Bay theater critic Mark E. Lieb. And he brought this story to the stage 2022-23, and a revival of the production opened at Strad Center last weekend. It closes this weekend. As we speak right now, the cast is in front of a whole group of high schoolers doing this play. It's incredible. And joining us is someone with connections not just to the play's revival, but a key player in those sit-ins. Since its inception, the U.S. House of Representatives seat for Florida's 11th district has been occupied by a Democrat. Sam Gibbons first, Kathy Castor now, and in between them, Congressman Jim Davis served from 1997 to 2007, ran for governor of Florida in 2006, and lost to a guy who's a Democrat now, Charlie Crist. Guys, I've seen this congressman at some of my favorite concerts in my whole life, and he's here right now. Thank you for joining us today, Congressman Jim Davis. How are you?
Good. So you were also at the Kanye West concert?
Oh, did you go to Kanye? Did you go to the Kanye?
I was the oldest person in there. With
oh,
my
man, no. I saw you years ago at Duran Jones. It was a February show, and he's got a great song called Morning in America, and I definitely had a buzz, and I was like, of course, Jim Davis is at this one.
I'm not that hip, let's be honest.
Oh, man, you're pretty cool. I want to get right into it, Congressman, if I could. Your grandfather, Cody Fowler, he's a character in this play. As a son of a single mom, he probably had a different kind of view about people who didn't have what other people had, right? Historically, Cody Fowler was known as a prominent white attorney who defended black clients. He saw the good in everybody and believed that when you have the opportunity to step up, you should, when you can see what can be done, right? It's right there in front of you. I know that you heard the story of the sit-ins from your dad, Congressman, but you knew your grandfather. He was your grandfather, right? And you said you were blown away by how Jim Wicker did a lot of the little things that Cody Fowler did, laying back in the chair. For instance, your grandpa has a bust on the Tampa Riverwalk. You have a cousin who's politically conservative who liked the play. And can you say how you think your grandpa might have reacted to this production and seeing this?
I think my grandfather and Julian Lane, an unsung hero, and Reverend Lowry would be stunned to know that message is unfortunately timely again. Mm-hmm. That once again we're living in very tough times. By the way, back then, most of those families got death threats in 1960. Pretty rough time, just as it is right now. I'm not saying people are getting death threats. But they stood up for what they believed in, starting with 40 students at Middleton and Blake and a brave young barber, by the way, of deep faith. When I met Clarence Ford, he was the youth director at Mount Zion Church on Columbus. And they did what they thought was right. And you're correct. Julian Lane instructed the police to protect the protesters. Perhaps the only time that happened in the South in sit-ins. And Julian Lane would go on to integrate the pools, the beaches, the movie theaters, City Hall, and lose his reelection without regret. Very similar to what happened in Nashville with the mayor Ben West up there. So it is a very timely, compelling, inspiring story. One of my favorite moments is the federal judge who came out in tears after the play. It's very moving for folks that believe in justice and dispense justice, regardless of political party or ideology. And this play will close on Sunday, but WEDU is producing a documentary. They're going to produce materials for schools. And I think this play is going to have life in other cities. It's something we can be very proud of.
Yeah, it's incredible. And all of that dialogue is actually in the play. Julian B. Lane talking to the police chief, and the chief saying, well, your voters aren't going to like this. And he's like, well, who, my white voters? You know, and it's incredible how much is in there. You talk about the death threats. Those are in there. The Reverend Lowry's in his house, and he's getting these calls on the phone. And I'm just going to go and spoil it. It closes this weekend. There's a really like jolting scenes and their gunshots in this play. It is incredibly dramatic. It's wild. And you talk about all WEDU. You got to see this play, I think, in 23 Congressmen, and you got help from a very formidable group. You guys raised $500,000 for this revival. We're talking about Mayor Pam Iorio, Alex Sink, the former CFO of Florida, Frank and Carol Morsani, and of course Arthenia Joyner, who at age 17 was one of the Middleton High students who took part in this. The money not only pays for the actors, it gets stage works into the Strass Center. You mentioned WEDU producing a documentary that's going to be available on PBS at some point, right? And then also these high school students. Yesterday I was there. It was a line around the queue. I mean, it was all Blake kids. They went in, they watched the show. There's actually a character in the show who's from Blake, Joseph Fasher, I think is his name, and he comes out in a Blake jacket, and that was a really cool moment. But you talked about the
went nuts.
It's nuts. I mean it's nuts for one to see a group of high school students watch this particular play. One, because the history is so close. And those kinds of things are still boiling up. And these are kids whose communities are still affected by this, whose parents have been affected by this. And then just to see them kind of absorb the play, there's a lot of really strong language in there. And it's a complicated thing. And they're so great at it. I wish I could have seen a talk back.
One of the strongest responses was from the local Catholic schools. The Catholic Church, which I did not know.
Well, you're a Jesuit guy.
I
right?
am. I'm not Catholic, but the Jesuits beat up on me a little bit. They needed to. But the Catholic Church had a rich, deep tradition of standing up for equality when it came to race back in the 60s. You don't pick on these nuns. I mean, there are stories about the nuns protecting little boys at threat of their life. I think they tried to burn down St. Pete Claver, whose kids came to see the play. So this is who we are as Floridians. These are our values. They are shared values. They transcend politics. And in that particular moment in our history, it worked. And I think it's a powerful message that needs to be shared far beyond Tampa, far beyond Florida. The New York Times wrote a wonderful review about the play. We think there'll be interest in the South. I talked to Ambassador Andrew Young about the play. He's very excited about it, put up on his website yesterday. This is an example of Black, white, and brown history in Florida that we need to embrace and hold up as an example and inspiration.
It's absolutely wild because you can still walk by the Woolworth where it was. I mean, it is right there. It is like living in front of you. And by the way, if you're just joining us, that voice you're hearing belongs to former congressional rep Jim Davis. He's here for another 11 minutes or so. We're talking about When the Righteous Triumph, an incredible production that involves his grandpa, Cody Fowler, is in there. You can try to give us a call, 813-239-9663. Text us, DJ at WMNF.org. Go ahead, Ben.
Question, do you what was it that made your grandfather different?
You know, I'm still asking that question, and I was very close to my grandfather. I think, first of all, he believed we're all God's children, and I think Julian Lane was the same. One of the things they both did, my grandfather was a commander or an officer in a unit in World War I in the Army, and Julian Lane did the same thing in World War II, and they had black and white soldiers. And so, you know, when you're in battle, when you're preparing to defend your country, those different superficial differences fade into the background very, very quickly. And I think both these men left their service in the military with an appreciation that it's the inside that matters more than the outside.
That sounds like an idea for another play, by the way.
Yeah.
Still working on this one. But the point is, this is very fundamental. And they both, the way I describe my grandfather, these students and the people that want to be lawyers, in the right place at the right time to do the right thing. Mm-hmm. And so that's what these gentlemen did. But it was these 40 brave students in Clarence Ford, when the play says, it was interviewed in front of the Woolworth building, says, if I get shot, I get shot. And they stood up, and these leaders, city leaders of deep faith and conviction, joined them. It was the right place at the right time for people to stand up.
And we have a caller here, Natalie from Brandon. You're on the air with the congressman.
Hi. First, let me say thank you so much to Mr. Davis. So bear with me for a minute. February 2020, I watched I think it was called the Tampa Technique on WEDU. Mm-hmm. I'm a Tampa native. I learned so much about Black history in Tampa that I wasn't aware of. Then, you know what happened in March? COVID hit. Everybody had a staycation. So I decided to go out and have a staycation with my son and explore, actually visit some of these Tampa landmarks. So we arrive at the Woolworth, and there's the marker. And I see several names that I recognize, people who I grew up with. One name was my mother. Had no idea that she was a part of the first sit-in.
Wow.
And then Clarence Fort, who is a cousin on my dad's side of the family.
Wow. And Clarence Fort was a barber on Central Avenue.
I took my mother to the play, thoroughly enjoyed it. We learned so much. She probably knew it. I learned so much about Tampa historians like Cody Fowler, like Julian B. Lane. You know, I knew the names, but I didn't know the history behind them. And even though it was at Stageworks, it wasn't on my radar. So thank you to Davis and everyone else who elevated the stage, literally, by bringing it to the Straz. I read the article in the Times. Phenomenal article. I hope that this goes throughout the South and maybe even across the country, because what I envisioned about how sit-ins played out in Tampa, I just assumed that it was violence, like you would see in historical footage.
Yeah,
It was not. It was very orchestrated and planned, and that part is important. And for young people to hear that and to see that during, you know, this period, this space of complacency that we're in right now, to know that high school students were doing this during a time when a lot of people weren't speaking out, but they were, and they made huge strides, not just on behalf of fellow young people, but all Black people.
We somehow collectively wind up remembering so many events from the civil rights era for their violence. You know, the beatings on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, Selma, the dogs in Birmingham.
Thank you for your call, Natalie.
And not often enough do we turn the camera toward situations like this where things sort of worked out.
That was wonderful for Natalie to share this, and we spent a lot of time with the Fort family. I want to mention that the schools wanted to send over 10,000 kids to see the play.
Wow.
Pinellas superintendent wanted to send 6,000 because these kids believe it. They want authenticity. They want something they can touch and feel. And the events we're describing happen right here in the Tampa Bay area, in many cases just a few blocks from us. One of the reasons we're doing the WED documentary is for people that didn't get to see the play. They're recording the play on Tuesday. It'll be available. We're going to make sure this is freely available to everybody. And we want people to know the story behind the story. I was talking to the son of Harold Wolf. If you've been around here for a long time, you remember Wolf Brothers.
Sure.
Harold Wolf is the gentleman that took in Reverend Lowry after the Klan tried to kill him. I called his son up and I said, "Do you remember this?" He said, "Yeah." "Do you want to hear the story about the rifle my dad bought to protect Reverend Lowry and the Klan coming to my house?" I said, "This is the story behind the story that needs to be told. The story of Reverend Lowry, of Julian Lane." So that's what the documentary is going to do.
Gosh, yeah, it's pretty wild. And you know, the mayor at the time, we're talking about him, Julian B. Lane, after your grandpa, with Woolworth Management and the Reverend A. Lowry of the NAACP, they more or less mediated the desegregation of not just Woolworth, but all of the lunch counters. And they wanted to move forward with this plan pretty quietly, opting not for a big announcement in the papers. This play also comes at a time when it's kind of risky to talk about the dark history of the U.S. and anything that might be remotely considered woke or teaching about diversity, equity, and inclusion. But at this point, the New York Times has come down to see the revival, as you've said. It's been covered extensively in the media. How much did you guys, though, similarly want to kind of stay under the radar in the same way with this?
This story blows through the politics because it is foundational. This is not about policy. This is about people. This is about values. This is about what binds us together as Americans, not what we look like, not how we worship, not how we love, not what party we belong to. This is foundational. And having served in the Congress and been a candidate, I believe right now in this environment, the arts are speaking to people in ways that cannot be heard. Elected officials are having a difficulty breaking through the den, whether it's Tallahassee or Washington. This play inspires empathy. It touches people in the gut and the heart. That's why it's so powerful and why it's so needed in these times.
Yeah, you told the New York Times the power is in what communities can do and have done in the past. You talked about how change has to come locally, not from Tallahassee or even D.C. It's kind of a sidebar. The demographics in Hillsborough are changing. You know, you talk about transcending politics. You've advocated for certain things, transit and things like that. But as you see the effects of the shift in ideology and this even in the county commission. And quite frankly, our municipal races will show us a lot about the voter block. But this play in so many ways is about courage that you're alluding to, from the demonstrators to the Lowrys who were shot at, to your grandfather, who it's interesting to see him in this play in these meetings. And, nobody was there except for them. This portrayal of thinking locally, what is it going to take from the community, from voters, and maybe officials elected or appointed to act in similarly courageous and inspiring ways during what are objectively turbulent times.
So now we're getting into the politics here.
Well, I don't want to drag you in here.
No, you're not dragging me at
Okay.
all. I've lived in that world, and I always will. I'm a citizen. Look, the best things happen locally. The indigent health care tax, that happened locally. I worked on that with Phyllis Bazansky. And it was copied by Polk County and Dade County. The transit campaign was something I worked on, too, that was local. This is a very rich community in diversity. We reflect where the country is, where the country is going. If we get it right, it's a model for the country. We don't wait on the state capitals and the national capitals to solve our problems. Change starts at home. This play demonstrates that.
Bill, I think you want to say something.
Yeah, could I just add in, first of all, thank you to Congressman Davis. He, I also helped run Cafe on Tampa, and he came and spoke about this a few months ago and raised, I think, the bulk of the money to bring this on. I saw it a few years ago at Stageworks, but thank you for inspiring the public and people to donate. And as much as Tallahassee and Washington, D.C. might be cutting arts funding, he proved, along with the other names you mentioned, that we can raise money locally for the arts. And, I was a co-founder of the Tampa Arts Alliance, which is building a grassroots movement of the arts. But we have to tell these stories. Art forces you to think. Think about this intense conversation we've had in the last few minutes and how we pivoted. It's all because of art. And I want to give a shout out to Mark Lieb, who you mentioned at the beginning. He is a professor, I think, at USF. He teaches other people how to write screenplays and other things in plays, but he also is an author himself, and it would have been written about in the New York Times, except that he's a great author. And we need to not only, on one hand, we need to celebrate or understand the stories and history, but on the other hand, we need to also understand that this is a locally written piece of art. And to the extent that you can take it statewide or nationally, it will be telling both stories at the same time. We need to continue to support the arts. And if federal and state funding is cut, we need local folks to step up and support it. The city obviously is. And let's tell more stories of this community.
I know you're trying to get through this run of the production, Congressman, but do you have it in you to show somebody else how to raise $500,000 and do this in Alabama? You want to take this thing on tour. Did you think you were going to be a theater producer?
Yeah, first of all, I have a day job.
Okay, yeah, you have a law firm job.
I'm a lawyer. So I just want to amplify what Bill just said. The power here is the message, and it's the unfortunate timing. Mark Lieb wanted to write about a positive chapter in history. He researched this assiduously. We've got a national civil rights historian, Professor Stephen Lawson, involved in this, was head of the history department at UNC Greensboro. Gary Mormino, who also has unassailable credentials. He got it historically right. Look, this play has legs, and it's something we should be proud of as a community. Again, I mentioned I've talked to Ambassador Young. The Carter Center folks have been helping. The LBJ Foundation has been helping. NAACP Chairman of the Board, Leon Russell from Clearwater, is interested in this, and the NAACP. I think this is something that is going to continue, and it may come back here. There's a lot of kids that need to see this play.
As the mayor, Julian B. Lane, said in the play, my city is a smart city. Tampa is a smart city, and I appreciate all of you joining us today for this last hour to hopefully get a little bit smarter with myself, Ben Montgomery, my co-host here at Tampa City Councilman Bill Carlson, Congressman Jim Davis. On the board today, Skip Sassy, and on the phones for us, Joe Remo. By the way, Bubba sent a text. He said, Cody Fowler sounds like the Atticus Finch of Tampa.
Let me just add that Cody Fowler, on the exit of his historical marker, says newspapers across the state celebrated the life of the genteel Southerner who did not hesitate to speak out against what he felt were unfair and illegal laws and traditions that plagued both the country and his adopted home.
He's incredibly persuasive, Jim's performance in this, and you can see how he won people over at a very difficult time and was able to just tap into that little bit of righteousness inside somebody and get them to get the bravery to do what's right, find it inside of them.
That was his turn. Now it's our turn.
Yes. And with that, we'll leave you. Joel and Shilke is on our way in here for Art in Your Ear. You've been listening to WMNF Tampa. Thank you so much for supporting this community radio station. Thank you for listening to us, and thank you for being our friends. We will see you in a week. You'll see, well, we'll figure it out. I think I'm out of town.
We'll figure it out next time.